Does Mortal Kombat 1 have too many guest characters? And should the sequel game dial things back a bit? Hop into the comment section of any popular Mortal Kombat video and you're bound to find people complaining about all the guest characters. Likely because NetherRealm seems to add more of them in every sequel, which means less Mortal Kombat characters overall. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, because for today's video, I wanted to dive deeper into this popular debate among Mortal Kombat fans. Some players love the guest characters and think they add much needed spice to the game, but others would prefer more returning characters from past Mortal Kombat games instead, especially characters who've been missing for a long time. So as mentioned earlier, let me know where you all stand on this issue in the comments down below, and without any further ado, let's begin. Starting off with the origin of guest characters in this series. Believe it or not, Mocap was the first guest character if you want to get technical about it, because he's based on a real-life person who did the motion capture for Mortal Kombat games. That's right, instead of animating every character by hand like Pixar does, along with some other big animation companies, video game developers prefer using motion capture to save time. That way they can fine-tune the animations by hand instead of doing the whole animation manually from scratch. It's a very big time saver, and to honor all his hard work as the motion capture champion, Carlos Pesina was added to the series as Mocap. The character even has his face and likeness, so I would consider him the first guest character. However, he's only been playable in a couple of games, but even so, many fans love him to this day, likely because he's the perfect meme and also an everyman who somehow got lost in the Chaos Realm, and come on, who can't relate to that? Anyways, I just wanted to mention Mocap real quick because he was technically the first guest character in a Mortal Kombat game. However, most players would consider Kratos the first guest character, even though he was only playable on the PlayStation 3, which upsets everyone to this day unless you owned a PS3. But yeah, Kratos was the first guest character in MK9 and even appeared in an early cinematic trailer, so players knew he was coming for a while, and as far as guest characters go, he's pretty amazing. His gameplay is super fun with tons of references to his games, and also he's not overpowered, which is always a big plus because it means he's not overplayed or unfair, unlike certain other characters in fighting games who can be very overpowered and super annoying. Thankfully, Kratos did not have that problem, but he did still have a big problem of his own. Kratos was banned at tournaments. Yep, I made a full video on this topic years ago, but to keep things simple, console-exclusive characters are banned at competitions, mainly because anyone playing on other consoles is unable to practice against that character, which makes it impossible to truly understand that character's strengths and weaknesses. In other words, Kratos gave an unfair advantage to anyone playing on a PS3, which made him banned at tournaments, and if you're wondering why fighting games no longer make console-exclusive characters, that's one big reason why. But keep in mind that Sony was responsible for this and not NetherRealm, because Kratos has always been exclusive to Sony consoles, and also they wanted his inclusion in MK9 to boost the sales of God of War 3. So in summary, even though Kratos was a perfect fit for Mortal Kombat 9, he came with some big issues. And today's video is not going to cover every guest character, but real quick before moving on, I wanted to talk about Freddy Krueger, because Kratos was there on day one, whereas Freddy Krueger was a secret DLC character. Back in 2011, NetherRealm actually kept their combat pack a secret, which meant that nobody knew which characters were coming next. So just imagine everyone's shock when we got Freddy Krueger instead of a Mortal Kombat character. To be honest with everybody watching this video right now, I was upset about it, because I was still in high school back then, and all I wanted was more Mortal Kombat characters. So imagine my disappointment when Freddy Krueger of all characters shows up instead. I was hoping for Havoc, Tremor, or possibly Chameleon, but nope, I got Freddy. The anger I felt back then is hard to describe. I felt ripped off, because Mortal Kombat had been gone for years, so I wanted all of my favorite characters to return in MK9. But instead, I got a scary movie villain, and I think that sums up how many players feel today about guest characters. At least NetherRealm is up front now and lets us know which characters are coming in advance, but I still think guest characters anger fans for the same reason that Freddy Krueger made me angry back in high school. To many players out there, no guest character will be cooler than a returning Mortal Kombat character, or at least most of them. But in my personal opinion, I think one or two guest characters is completely fine. Even as a diehard Mortal Kombat Kombat fan who prefers returning characters, I think that 1 or 2 guests is fine. And in fact, I prefer when guest characters come from other video games and possibly other fighting games. However, that leads us to the next big issue for Mortal Kombat games: the violence. These games are gory, and I mean beyond gory, so adding a guest character to this series is much trickier than other fighting games, mainly due to the finish him screen. Because it would be awesome for Dante to be in Mortal Kombat, hell yeah it would, but I doubt that Capcom would ever allow it, because they don't want Dante brutally chopped into tiny pieces while he screams in agony. I keep seeing people act like Buffy the Vampire Slayer is coming to Mortal Kombat, and I just have to ask, have any of you actually watched the show or movies? Because there's never that much gore, and the main characters never die gruesome deaths, so I seriously doubt that Buffy will ever make it in. And honestly, I'm kind of impressed that NetherRealm was able to find so many guest characters for each game. But that being said, they must be running low on ideas since we got Conan. Yeah, the guy that nobody has seen for 40 years or something crazy like that. If NetherRealm is reaching back decades to find a suitable guest character, then maybe it is time to dial things back a bit. In my personal opinion, no Mortal Kombat game should ever have more than 4 guest characters, and honestly, even 3 guest characters is pushing it. If I was actually in charge, then 3 guest characters would be the max. But I'm not, so the next game might have 7 guest characters, which has actually been a problem since Mortal Kombat X, because that game had 4 guest characters, which is 1 too many for my taste. But thankfully, Leatherface was very fun to play. A bit too strong for my taste, as in he was overpowered and actually stayed that way too, unlike Alien who got nerfed. But regardless, even though every guest character in Mortal Kombat X was fun, I still think that 4 is too many. But NetherRealm just keeps ramping things up from there, because in Mortal Kombat 11, we got 5 guest characters. For Pete's sake, that's just too many, and even though I like Rambo, he's got a similar problem to Conan. Most active Mortal Kombat players are not big fans of him, and likely haven't watched one of his movies in years, which is another reason I wish NetherRealm would use game characters like BloodRayne. Anyways, fast forward to Mortal Kombat 1, and we have 6. Are you kidding me? 6 guest characters? That's like half the roster of 2XKO, or whatever it's being called. I think that game has 12 characters in total, so half the guest characters in MK1 would fill that roster. And even Street Fighter 6 only launched with like 18 characters, so 1/3 of the roster would be guest characters if NetherRealm made that game. Because once again, Mortal Kombat 1 had 6 guest characters, and that's just too many in my opinion. Man, we could have had Houtaro instead. Does anyone watching agree with me on this? I think the guest character situation has gotten out of hand for the Mortal Kombat series. It's just too many slots on the roster that could have been returning Mortal Kombat characters instead. And some people watching this video might disagree with me, but I believe that most players would prefer MK characters over guest characters in most situations. Which begs the question, why does NetherRealm keep adding more guest characters even though players have made it clear they would prefer less? The honest answer is actually quite simple. Guest characters sell more copies of the game. In other words, imagine a Conan fan seeing their character in Mortal Kombat 1. They're gonna buy the game now, whereas before they did not own it. Or imagine a big Terminator fan who finally buys the game after seeing the T-1000. That's the main idea behind guest characters in all fighting games, not just Mortal Kombat ones. Developers are trying to interest players who otherwise would not buy the game. They're reaching out to outside audiences and trying to get them interested in Mortal Kombat, which is why every game lately has 1 or 2 more guest characters than the previous game. Even though regular Mortal Kombat characters will sell more as DLC characters, the guest characters will sell more copies of the game overall, which is why there's been more of them in every game. But like I mentioned earlier, I think you're out of ideas, NetherRealm, so please tone it down in the next game. 2 or 3 guest characters is more than enough. But hey, that's just my opinion, and as many of you watching know, I love making these videos interactive, so let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you were put in charge of NetherRealm Studios, how many guest characters would you add to the game, and which characters would they be? For me personally, I'm thinking Doomslayer would be really cool, because not only is he super violent, but in his own games, he also dies in very violent ways, which makes him a perfect fit. And on top of that, he's very popular among fans. But let me know your thoughts. Would you prefer 1, 2, 3 guest characters, or no guest characters because you're a Mortal Kombat elitist and you don't want to see anyone but Mortal Kombat characters? No matter how you feel about this topic, let me know your opinions in the comments below, because like I say in every video, I love reading each and every comment. So grab that keyboard and make your voices heard. Ow, I just hit my finger on the desk. That stinks. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like down below. It helps the channel out a ton. And then finish that comment combo by subscribing and ringing that bell so you never miss any future videos. Make sure to come back next time, and as always, stay underdogs.